I've got 8 items, and each contains a number. Cool, right? Now that they're removed, what was the answer to number 5? This simple exercise might give us some interesting insight about move lists and if they're a sign of bad game design. Move lists and what they entail has risen over the years, and we need to discuss if they're actually a good thing. Move lists were never a staple in fighting games, but over time they became more prevalent. The question is, are they now a necessity? Hello there, I am the Uncut Angel, and today we're diving into the relevance of move lists and what they might reveal to us about game design as well as our own desires. Gone are the days of Mortal Kombat on Super Nintendo, where you didn't have a move list and just had to hit buttons until something worked, arguably what gave Mortal Kombat its appeal. These days, move lists and more recently frame data are things which give players less of an organic experience and more of a studied, mechanical one. It's almost like seeing a bunch of products under a Christmas tree rather than differently shaped boxes in forms to get excited about. Think about the time you really learned something. Everyone learns differently, but touching a hot stove is probably the best way, figuratively. You learn when you desire to do something, think critically about the mechanics surrounding that something, and thus uncover the results you're looking for. And this might be why we visit move lists so often. We aren't actually creating the pathways for our synapses to bridge the logic for unleashing a move, action, or result, but rather tempering the desire to see it happen at the expense of never truly understanding if there was a rhyme or reason to why the developers chose that input rather than another in the first place. More on that later. There's nothing wrong with rewarding players who learn the intricacies of a game through study, but when does that cross the line from keeping the game fun, balanced, and surprising, and not just a test of who studied more and ruining the mystique? In Fearless, Huo Yanjia says, "I believe there's no superiority or inferiority in wushu, just the distinction of practitioners with different levels of ability. Through the competition, we can discover this and meet the true self, because indeed, the antagonist is namely ourself." Developers may want to explore this in their design decisions. When your game has a tier list, or your players are compelled to make one after they play it, it's a sign your move list matters a lot. The character's fighting style should not matter, rather the player's competencies, so for that reason, there must be some singularity in control complexity. And nowhere is that more obviously displayed than in the move list. Now, speaking up against common themes in fighting games is clout suicide, but you know what? I don't care.
I don't care anymore. I'm joking. I never did.
The fervent demands from fighting game fans over common design choices in every iteration and clone available, lest they just not be an option, may, no offense, be a sign of Stockholm Syndrome. According to dailycat.org, Stockholm Syndrome, also known as hostage identification syndrome, is defined as a psychological response wherein a captive begins to identify closely with his or her captors, as well as with their agenda and demands. In other words, a process of brainwashing the captive. So how does this relate to move lists? When you access the move list, it's because you either forgot about your options or need to recall how to perform an option, or you're in denial about how much you suck and figure it must be because you aren't using a secret move that'll solve all your problems. Where else in the gaming kingdom does such a problem exist? Were you ever playing Ratchet and Clank and were worried about not knowing how to jump? Were you ever playing Gears of War and forgot how to shoot? Were you ever playing Final Fantasy in 2016 and forgot how to tap X? What makes gaming fun and amazing is the fact you can potentially forget the controller exists and instead become the character on the screen. As a kid, you would jump with the controller if your character needed to clear a long distance. You'd steer and lean with the controller if you needed to take a tight turn in a racing game. These gestures are a sign that you are becoming one with the controller and one with the game. Often they are mechanics you learn without having to look them up. You're probably thinking, this is the part where I poo-poo on fighting games. Well, surprise, surprise, I think fighting games did this feature the best. But when you're the best, you eventually get into your head and become your own worst enemy. Let me explain. Fighting game inputs are the most instantly satisfying of any genre. To make a case for this, with platformers you can toss your tools out, sometimes literally, and wait for the large window of the attack to land on your opponent. With shooting games, you see the bullet traveling with most weapons, and even if you're firing rapidly, you aren't getting anything more than a spun sound 10 to 15 times before sinking your target and moving on to the other 20 spawns. There's very little visual cues happening as you chop away at their health, and with RPGs, you literally wait. No, seriously, you just wait. Cool. But with fighting games, you press the attack button and bam, your move is out there. And you are treated as a fighter as your spacing determines whether or not the energy it took for you to use that move was worth the risk of your opponent countering it. In a boxing match, you don't see fighters throwing haymakers from across the ring. These moves that matter are done up close and personal. And I know what you're thinking, Mr. Uncut Dick, I throw jabs from across the screen all the time. And to that I say, jabs are not consequential moves as far as recovery goes. And what's more, it's something real fighters also do. As a form of intimidation and spacing, boxers will dance on their feet in space with jabs, just as you key charge and jump around and otherwise straight up taunt in fighting games. This communicative action you do is what immerses you in the experience, where you forget about the controls and become one with the game, especially with the rush you feel when you take a chance and go in for the huge counter move. The controls make it so that you're never left waiting for your character to skid to a halt to do a janky turnaround. It's all very instant and very satisfying. And just when you think fighting games couldn't get any better, here comes complexity! Welcome to Complex Simulator 17, where you get to shave your thumbs to their nubs, do mental gymnastics to perform the move your opponent doesn't care to study, and don't forget about special backdashing.
In today's video, I'm going to talk about the elusive Korean backdashing on the one-player side. And in tomorrow's video, I'm going to talk about it on the two-player side.
Here in Complex Simulator 17 Alpha Prefix Beta Deuce, there are 37 different branches of attacks after performing a punch. Nobody will know what you're doing, not even you!
What? You stupid You stupid What the hell is he doing, bro? I was trying to do a Shoryuken this whole time!
Want to shoot a fireball? Awesome! Choose from 3 different ways to release it. If you use your third thumb, you can hit another face button at the same time to change the color of the projectile. Whoa! Order your copy of Complex Simulator 17 and we'll throw in a smattering of the prime number releases throughout the series, and you'll get an extra character to deal with. Figure that out! And thus, the cancer spreads. But rather than telling devs, hey, I kinda wanna whack it later, but I can't with all this homework, you sit back, abstinent, using the tissues at your bedside to now wipe away your salty tears because it's your fault things aren't working. If only you tortured yourself in an isolated training mode and used flashcards to figure out the punish for every situation, then you'd have fun!
I think it's because I'm not hitting 4 correctly. I personally think I'm not hitting 4 correctly. But it's pissing me off why I'm not hitting 4. See?
The genre, which gave you a stupid amount of precise control for your wonky, blue-haired anime homo, now interrupts your experience with the desire to dig into your move list to find out how to throw his magic sprinkle dust to date rape his opponent into submission. The input involves 6 directions and 2 face buttons, but only after you're charged up and your opponent is falling from the night sky as you short hop into the button sequence. But you like complexity, right? You bought yourself a complexity pad with extra buttons for the 9 fingers on your right hand. You're an avid gamer who by association was forced, or is in the process of forcing your friends, to go through the torments your master demands of you. You don't mind your less competitive offline matches getting interrupted by your friend referencing the branching sets of moves at the start of each round because he didn't keep himself as dedicated as you. You like misinputting things 13 times in practice mode so you can be the idiot you are and attempt it with online lag during a ranked match and then blame yourself for it not working out because it's fun. Right? In Super Smash Bros., universal controls are used for each character so that they can first of all be fairly played and experienced, despite controller dexterity, and not require a bachelor's degree from training mode to competently use the character against competent opponents. Wouldn't it be nice to really know how to use more than 3 of these characters? The move list in Smash is smartly coupled with a synopsis of what the move does and in what circumstance these moves could be useful. Other games offer small icons which indicate tertiary effects as well. This is great. Now, I'm not on no Mario PP just because I use them as an example because Nintendo controllers, but philosophically they approach a fighting game as it was meant to be played before Gen Z came around and pouted about not being able to play a game that hates them more than they hate themselves. Smash's move list is basically an afterthought. It's the double-spaced essay of at least 1,000 required characters that you started writing Monday morning because it was due Monday morning. It's the how to paint your nails YouTube tutorial that you stretched out to 10 minutes for the algorithm. Look at how much UI space it took to fill up the screen. And you know what's cray-cray? They fill up seats in hype competitive tournaments. How often do Smash streamers hop into practice mode and hunt through their move lists? If Smash does anything right, it's keeping the control straightforward and sticking moves to inputs which make sense for that move. Seriously, in what universe is this intuitive? So what are some ways we can mitigate the need for a move list if it needs to exist at all? Before we answer that, I want to be clear. When the move list becomes an integral part of learning how to competently play a character, it's a sign there's a developer failure of some kind. Including a move list because you want to reassure potential ambiguity players may make the habit of inputting, like holding down 2 buttons when the move requires only 1, is not to be admonished. With that said, let's look at a game that didn't even have a move list. Mortal Kombat got away with its mechanics because it offered fundamentals that were easy to understand. Everyone had a sweep, an uppercut, a dropkick, and a throw. These fundamental moves shared among the fighters could be used in a number of circumstances during combat and could take you a long way. You didn't need a move list to tell you how to punch because as soon as you do it once, you understand. There's no need to memorize a punch or even make a name for it for that matter. Gamers took the time to name moves on their own and there's nothing wrong with that. Another way to mitigate the need for a move list is to have intuitive visual cues for your moves or sensible mapping for moves. For instance, with a shooting game, we don't press the south button anymore to shoot a projectile. We usually use the triggers. And why is that? Because that's the finger that we use to shoot a gun in real life. So it just makes intuitive sense to do it like that. Well, how do we do this for fighting games? Well, you've got 4 extremities and commonly on controllers 4 buttons. So just map the extremities to those 4 buttons. Now, instead of referencing a move list to see how to do the spinning back kick you remember doing, you might be inclined to fundamentally try holding back and pressing the respective kick button. And then if the kick launches the opponent, maybe the player can try holding up. If it moves the character back, maybe the player can try holding forward. You get the idea. Explaining logic like this is like learning how to do math instead of memorizing the results of every math problem imaginable. These days, fighting games expect you to memorize their math or see the answer before the problem, and it's exactly why you can't get your friends to give a damn about Stockholm Syndrome 6. While they enjoy an unintuitive, or is it non-intuitive, gaming experience, you'll be their crutch to force feed them what you memorize so they can experience the game with you, providing they choose the 6% of the cast you had the capacity to memorize. What a waste! You've got a game genre which over the years has built into your 5-head gamer cranium how to move and jump and dash and run and kick and punch and space yourself and crush highs and lows and read your opponent and duck and maybe even do some complex inputs that shouldn't take a psychic to unleash. And yet, you're expected to dig 6 tabs deep into a move list to figure out what random buttons the devs assign to a move, which you'll likely forget the moment you try another character, primarily because that is not the proper way to learn and understand. As referenced earlier, game design is all about intention, and you should have an inkling of what buttons do if the fundamentals you're given are worth their salt. Or, let's be real, your salt. If you're truly expected to be a psychic or are genuinely unable to figure out how to perform a move, then the developer better have a good reason for hiding the answer in a move list. It otherwise may be that they're hiding behind some bad design choices. Sometimes not understanding the curriculum or feeling overwhelmed by it has more to do with the teacher than the student. Oh, and by the way, remember those numbers from earlier? What was the answer to number 7? Well, here's the list again. If I asked what was number 7, you could either remember it and not be any smarter, or you can say something like, the baseline of 6.5 is then multiplied by the number in the list, and then the number in the list is added to get the answer. So if it's 7 you're looking for, then the math is 6.5 times 7 plus 7. Or you can make your life especially easy by just saying 7.5 times 8 equals 60, 7.5 times 9 equals 67.5, and so on. Suddenly, unlocking what you believed might have been more convoluted than it was shows itself to be straightforward, deliberate, and designed. And this is why I don't fundamentally want to admonish developers for adding a move list, because they do help definitively show how some moves are completed when, as mentioned earlier, players may input more buttons than necessary to perform an attack sequence that ultimately requires much less. But in a genre known for its specificity, it's a stain that they are used as a crutch to encourage developers to keep assigning random inputs to moves rather than following a rhyme or reason. Drop a like on this video, because that's the only thing you can do anymore. If you want to see more content like this, let me know how useful you consider the move list to be in fighting games and whether or not you like them. The Discord link is below, where we talk about the philosophy of game development and share our game dev projects. Currently, I'm working on my game's online mode, so things are, this is kind of trash right now. I'm gonna get back to that. In the meantime, you can play the demo. Link is in the description. In the next video, we're going to dive into what actually makes games scary. Subscribe. Bye.
Ha ha ha.